All right, today we're going to talk about democracy, but we're not just going to talk about the lofty ideals. We're going to put it to the test, move beyond the theory, and look at how it actually performs in the real world.
So here's the big question, right? We're always told democracy is the best system out there, the superior form of government. But what does that really mean in practice? I mean, does it actually work? Does it deliver on all its promises? That's exactly what we're here to find out.
So, what are those promises? Well, these are the big ones we generally expect. Democracy is supposed to promote equality, enhance our dignity as individuals, lead to better decisions, help us resolve conflicts without violence, and, this one's huge, give us room to correct our own mistakes. This is the ideal, the benchmark we're measuring it against.
And this quote right here just nails the problem, doesn't it? It's this weird paradox we live in. We love the idea of democracy, but day to day we're often, well, not so thrilled with how it actually plays out. And that gap between the ideal we just talked about and the reality we live in, that's exactly what we're going to unpack.
Okay, so let's get into our first big test. How well do democracies actually govern? Are they effective and responsive, or are they just slow and clunky?
So here's a common complaint you hear all the time. Democracies are slow. And yeah, they are. But maybe that's a feature, not a bug. Think about it. A dictator can snap their fingers and make a decision. Boom, done. But what if people hate it? That can lead to huge resistance. A democracy, on the other hand, takes its time with deliberation, with negotiation. But because it follows a process, the final decision is usually something more people can get behind. It's often more effective in the long run.
And that leads us to another huge benefit, transparency. This is basically your right as a citizen to look under the hood and see how decisions are being made. You can check if the rules were followed, and that's something you almost never ever get in a non-democratic government.
But okay, let's get real for a second. The record isn't spotless, right? Democracies can be frustratingly slow to respond to what people need. They can even ignore what the majority wants sometimes. And corruption, we hear stories about it all the time, so they're definitely not free of it. But, and this is a huge but, they are still miles better on all these fronts than any non-democratic regime.
And that really gets to the heart of it. Despite all its flaws, a democratic government is seen as legitimate. Why? Because it's the people's own government. It might be slow, it might be messy, but it's ours. And that's exactly why, when you look at the data from South Asia, you see this massive, overwhelming support for the idea of democracy. At the end of the day, people want to be ruled by representatives they chose themselves.
All right, so that's governance. Let's switch gears and talk about something else we all care about. Money. The economy. Does democracy actually make us richer? And maybe even more importantly, does it create a society that's more fair?
Now, this might actually surprise you. If you look at the economic growth rates from 1950 to 2000, dictatorships, on average, actually grew a tiny bit faster. It's not a huge difference, especially for poorer countries. But what it tells us is that democracy is no magic bullet for economic development.
But hey, how big the economic pie is? That's only half the story, right? The real question is, how is that pie sliced up? Is the wealth being shared so that everyone gets a chance at a better life? Or is it all just going to the people at the very top? And when you look at the data, wow, it's pretty stark. Even inside democracies, you can have these massive, extreme levels of inequality. I mean, look at South Africa and Brazil. The top 20% of the population walks away with over 60% of the country's income, while the bottom 20% gets less than 3%. So the big takeaway here is that just because you have a democracy, it doesn't mean you've automatically solved economic inequality.
And this cartoon just hits you right in the gut, doesn't it? It shows exactly what's happening. The economy grows, but all the benefits, all the gains, are getting sucked up by the folks who are already wealthy, leaving everyone else with crumbs. It's a huge challenge that a lot of democracies are still wrestling with.
Okay, so the economic report card is mixed. What about the social side of things? Do democracies build societies that are more peaceful, more harmonious, where everyone is treated with dignity and respect?
Well, on this front, democracy has a clear upper hand. Look, no society is perfect, conflicts are going to happen. But democracies are really good at handling these tensions. They set up rules of the game, procedures for competition, which makes it way less likely that disagreements will turn violent. Compare that to a non-democratic regime that just tries to suppress and ignore differences. That can be like a ticking time bomb.
But, and this is super important, for this to actually work, a couple of things have to be true. First, majority rule isn't the final word. The majority always has to work with the minority. And second, rule by the majority can't just mean one religious group or one race gets to be in charge forever. Everybody has to have a fair shot at being in the majority at some point.
And this all points to what might be the single most important thing democracy gives us. When it comes to promoting the dignity and freedom of every single person, democracy is head and shoulders above any other system. That passion for respect, that's the very foundation of democracy.
And this visual really drives that home. Think about societies that have been built on things like caste or other deep-seated inequalities. Getting to true equality is a long, hard road. But once you recognize the principle of individual dignity in your laws, everything changes. It gives people the moral and legal firepower they need to fight for their rights. It makes their struggle not just possible, but legitimate.
All right, so we've looked at how democracies govern, how they handle the economy, and how they shape society. Now let's pull it all together and figure out what democracy's real superpower actually is. And here we are. This might sound a little backwards at first, but it's a really deep insight. The fact that people are constantly complaining about democracy, that they have these huge expectations, that they're always pointing out its flaws, that isn't a sign that it's failing. It's actually a sign that it's succeeding. Why? Because it proves that people are no longer just passive subjects waiting to be told what to do. When people publicly complain and express their dissatisfaction, it means they've become active citizens. It shows they develop this awareness, this ability to look at power critically and say, hey, we demand better. And you can see that transformation right here in the numbers. Look across South Asia. A solid majority of people believe their vote actually makes a difference in how their government is run, and a difference in their own lives. That belief, that sense of personal power, that's the fuel that makes a healthy democracy run.
So when you boil it all down, the most important thing democracy gives us isn't a flawless government or a perfect economy. Its work is never done. The minute it passes one test, another one pops up. No, its real value, its true superpower, is that it empowers its citizens to always push for something better. The real test isn't perfection, it's progress. And that leaves us with one last thought for you to take away. What are you demanding of yours?